All right, let's tackle a huge and honestly pretty confusing puzzle: climate change. The science seems pretty clear on one side, but the politics? It's a total battlefield. We're going to try and get to the bottom of how two people can look at the exact same data and see two completely different worlds. Okay, let's jump in.
I mean, this question really is the heart of the whole thing, isn't it? We are all on the same rock, flying through space together. The laws of physics are the same for everyone. So how on earth did we get so polarized that it feels like we're living in parallel universes? That's what we're going to unpack.
So, before we get into all the messy political stuff, let's just lay down a quick, clean baseline. What does the science actually say before anyone puts their spin on it?
Okay, here's the foundational number. This comes straight from the IPCC, the big international body of scientists. The planet has warmed by about 1.1 degrees Celsius because of what we humans have been doing. That's it. That's the basic physical reality we're starting with.
And among the experts who literally do this for a living, the consensus is just overwhelming. We're talking more than 97%. In fact, some of the newer analyses put that number at over 99%. So the actual debate among scientists about whether this is real and we're causing it, it's pretty much over. And that brings us to the most important point, the public fight, the one we see on the news and on social media. It isn't really about atmospheric chemistry. It's about much more human, much messier things, like how big of a risk is this really? Who's going to pay for the solutions? And maybe the biggest one of all, who do you trust? This is where simple science gets incredibly complicated.
Okay, so let's take a look at just how differently we see reality depending on our political team. And fair warning, these numbers are pretty stark.
Just look at this. You ask a really personal question. Is this affecting your community where you live? 86% of Democrats say yeah, absolutely. But only 41% of Republicans say the same. That's a 45-point gap on whether you can see the effects right outside your front door. It's massive.
And, that gap gets even wider when you ask about the cause. 70% of Democrats say humans contribute a great deal. For Republicans, that number drops all the way down to 20%. This isn't just a slight disagreement. It's a fundamentally different understanding of the problem. Now this is where it gets really interesting to me. It shows that we're not just thinking differently, we're feeling differently. We're living in completely separate emotional realities. Democrats are way more likely to feel sad or frustrated. Republicans, overwhelmingly more likely to feel suspicious of the whole thing. We're having totally different emotional reactions to the same topic.
Okay, so if throwing more facts at the problem doesn't work, what is going on inside our heads? Let's peel back the next layer and talk about the psychology of why we believe what we believe.
Now, this is a fancy social science term, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. It means our brains are wired to do two things: be right and belong. And a lot of the time, belonging is more important. We will unconsciously push away information, even facts, if we think they might get us kicked out of our tribe.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. When you're presented with a challenging new fact, your subconscious isn't asking, is this data valid? No. It's asking, what are my friends going to think? What will my family say? Will I still fit in if I believe this? Staying in the group often feels safer than being factually correct.
This whole dynamic is then amplified by our deepest moral values. Research shows that people on the left tend to build their worldview around concepts like care and fairness. So for them, climate change is a story about harming vulnerable people. It's an injustice. Meanwhile, people on the right often give more weight to values like loyalty, authority, and purity. So they might see climate policies as a threat to their country, to their traditions, to their way of life. It's the same issue, seen through two totally different moral lenses. Now, our individual psychology doesn't just operate in a vacuum, right? It gets supercharged by these huge, powerful external forces. So let's look at how money and media basically pour gasoline on this fire. You know the saying, money talks? Well, in politics, it shouts. In just 1 year, 2021, the oil and gas industry spent around $119 million on lobbying. When you spend that kind of cash, you make sure your point of view is always part of the conversation. And it's not just about lobbying. The whole system is set up with these powerful incentives. The U.S. gives tens of billions of dollars every single year in direct subsidies to fossil fuel companies. When that much money is baked into the way things are, trying to change course is like trying to turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. And then you have our media, which keeps us locked in our separate bubbles.
If you watch left-leaning news, you're seeing a constant stream of stories about extreme weather and corporate villains. If you watch right-leaning news, you're hearing about the high costs of climate policies and any little bit of scientific uncertainty that exists. Both sides are showing a piece of the truth, but by only showing one piece, they make the divide even bigger.
And this whole thing creates a really nasty feedback loop. If you're on the right, the media shows you the most extreme voices from the left. If you're on the left, you're shown the most extreme voices from the right. We all end up arguing against these cartoon caricatures of each other instead of the actual person next door.
Okay, I know. After hearing all that, it can feel pretty hopeless. But here's the twist in the story. It turns out if you stop arguing about the giant, abstract problem and you start talking about specific, concrete solutions, a very different picture starts to emerge.
For example, check this out. A massive 83% of Americans support tax credits to help people make their homes more energy efficient. That's not a partisan issue. That's just common sense. It saves people money. Who's going to argue with that?
And here's another one. Almost 80% of us are in favor of tax credits for carbon capture technology. It just goes to show you, when you frame the conversation around innovation, around technology, and around investment, suddenly, people can find a lot to agree on. And the list just keeps going. There's huge bipartisan support for planting more forests, for investing in a more secure energy grid, and for giving people more local control with things like rooftop solar. The common ground is actually enormous.
So, maybe this is the real takeaway. We get trapped in these loud, angry fights over vague, tribal labels like green policy. But when you actually break it down into specific actions, you find out that, hey, most of us want the same basic things: cheaper energy, a secure country, and cleaner air.
In the end, the laws of physics are what they are. They are not negotiable. They don't care for Democrats or Republicans. But our politics, how we choose to deal with this, that is 100% a choice. We can keep screaming at caricatures of each other, or we can start building on all this common ground we've just found. The only question left is, how do we start that better conversation?